Welcome, welcome. Okay, let's do a quick check and see if you all can hear me. So I don't know who's in the room yet, but welcome. Before I dive in, go ahead and let me know that you can hear me. And we will get started. Oh, let's see, can I actually see your comments here? It looks like I can. Okay, so I'm going to have faith that you all can actually hear me. So we're going to get started. I know there's a bit of a delay if you're watching on LinkedIn, and this is a LinkedIn Live. So there's a little bit of a delay, but I will get your comments. If you're watching on one of the other platforms, I may not see your comments in relatively real time, but I will get your LinkedIn comments. So please engage. Welcome. I've been excited to have this conversation with you. Again, if you're here with me today, just drop a quick hi in the chat on whatever platform it is that you're joining. So to get started, I'll introduce myself for just a moment. My name is Bribiesca-Hedin. I'm a leadership and career coach, former management consultant, and enterprise strategy expert. And I spend most of my time now working with mid-career professionals who want to either elevate the way that their teams are working or just elevate the way that their careers are going, one or the other. And I wanted to have this conversation, well, probably no surprise, simply because of what we're all hearing about and around DEI. So this conversation seemed particularly timely, and I really wanted to share a perspective that I have been sharing kind of all along. By no means am I the DEI expert. There's so many people having conversations far more expert on this subject than I am. But there are going to be few people who necessarily have more expertise in aligning teams, aligning organizations, and getting leaders to have the results they want. And I wanted to bring this conversation together because sometimes when things aren't going the way we want them to, right, in all fairness, we lose sight of what we actually do have control over. So this conversation is really you taking back control over what you can continue to do or do better as it relates to creating spaces with diverse employees, diverse leadership, building inclusive teams, whether or not that's a priority for your organization, right? Because there is your priority, there are your values and the culture you want to elicit and build, whether it's in your company or on your team, in your department, et cetera. And then there's what your organization is prioritizing. Now, if you're really lucky, you're one of those few where those come together. But the reality is that's seldom the case. Seldom are your organization's priorities aligning with your most closely held values. So if diversity is a closely held value for you, if you value having people of all different backgrounds and perspectives and levels in the conversation and playing on the field full out and knowing that they're being seen and recognized, I want to give you tools to be able to do that. And again, this just seemed like the right time to have this conversation. So please feel free to share your thoughts as we're going through the comments. Unfortunately, this ends up being one way because there's no speaker on your end, but I am absolutely looking through your comments as they come in. And hi, Thaddeus. Thanks for joining from Boston. So we've all seen the headlines, right? This is no surprise. This is no shock. The DEI roles are being cut. Budgets are being slashed everywhere. It's all over the news. You know, leaders are scrambling to figure out what it is that's happening next. But the real problem, as I see it, again, feel free to push back, isn't the loss of funding. The real problem we're seeing right now is that for too long, inclusion, diversity, equity, it's been treated as a separate program, not as a leadership standard. And I'll tell you what I mean about that in a moment. See, if inclusion is just a function, or a department or something that has to be checked off and done, then it disappears when the budget does, when the popularity does, when a new politician comes into office with their own, way of defining what's good and what isn't. But if diversity, inclusion, equity, if those are lenses through which you lead, through which you make decisions, then it becomes a part of how we work, literally how we make decisions every day. And it doesn't matter what's happening at the policy level or on a political level. And again, I'll say a little bit more about that, but I really want you to take on, just for a moment, you don't even have to agree with me, but take on for a moment the perspective of diversity and inclusion as a lens versus a function that can be cut or deprioritized. And one example I like to give is integrity. So think about integrity. Integrity is not a separate initiative, right? It is a way in which an organization or an individual carries themselves. It's the way in which they allow themselves to make decisions. It's the way in which they prioritize, what they're going to do, especially when things get complicated. It's a lens through which you operate. You don't have an integrity department that all of a sudden is no longer important and gets shut down and integrity goes out the window. So I propose that the same should be true for diversity and inclusion, right? The question isn't how do we keep DEI alive without funding? I'm saying that the question really is how do we lead in a way that naturally creates diversity and inclusion, irrespective of whether there's a department or a function or funding, right? This is what starts with becoming aware of how bias influences who we engage with. And I want to have a little bit of that conversation. We're not going to get deep into a bias conversation, but I want to give you this frame of reference, this lens, right? Because once we're aware of how our biases show up, and again, this is going to be a very brief part of the discussion, we can make more intentional decisions about who we're unintentionally overlooking, if that makes sense. So I'm going to called this a bias hack as I was putting these together for you, because I think that's the best way to think about it. Most leaders, most of us, there are people who we enjoy being with, people who naturally it feels very comfortable to be in their presence, to engage with them. We may have very similar backgrounds or ways of seeing the world and thinking. They may be different, but we might have some sort of other, what we call affinity or likeness to them, something that just naturally brings us together. Now, affinity is beautiful because it connects us with people, right? It's the whole birds of a feather. It brings us together with people that have something in common with us. It's natural, but, right, the back of the hand of that is that it limits inclusion, right? And the problem that I'm talking about here isn't intentional exclusion, just to be really clear. I'm talking about unintentional patterns, right? The key to inclusion isn't forcing diversity. It is literally expanding who we naturally decide to invest in and spend time with, even if they're not our favorite on the team. I'm a leadership coach and I have these conversations day in and day out, and the best leaders still have people they feel most comfortable and most connected to. We all do. Again, it is natural. So what I'm proposing in terms of what I'm calling this bias hack is that you consider who you're least comfortable with and then find opportunities to lean in. So I'm going to give you a couple of questions. One is already on the screen. And I want you to think back over this last year, right? Over this last year, who have you spent the most time mentoring or coaching or collaborating with? Right? Who do you spend that time with? Who do you invest in? Who does it feel like it's effortless to be around? So of course, we like effortless. So we spend more time in that space of effortlessness. So take just a quick moment and do like a quick audit for yourself, quick mental audit. Who have you spent the most time mentoring, coaching, and collaborating with? I'm going to ask you another question also around this self-audit. I want you to ask yourself, who are my go-to people? Right? Who have I not been engaging with meaningfully? And you'll see where this is all going, so just stick with me. Do they all share similar backgrounds and working styles or interests? And that's normal. Again, there's nothing not normal or wrong about this. What it is limiting. It's limiting your ability to create that culture that's diverse or inclusive or welcoming or whatever the case is. It's limiting it to your natural bias. Again, not bad, just limited. Now, I want you to think about the people you don't naturally gravitate toward. You know, those you don't mentor much, they don't seem to come to you with questions. You don't seek their feedback. You either avoid one-on-ones or keep them as short and unintentional as possible. And again, you don't have to out yourself anywhere. This is simply for you to start to notice those differences. Because those folks, that's where your opportunity for stronger engagement lives. So give me a quick note if you're following along. If this is making sense, just drop me a quick note and let me know, give me a yes if you're noticing this, or at least understand how this impacts the way you show up and how it limits your ability to create the kind of culture and environment that you want. Again, just naturally based on our very human normal biases. But drop me a note in the chat so I know that you're following along. Now I'm going to give you one more self-assessment, so to speak. And this is the vacation friend test. Again, these are not technical terms. It's just what I came up with because it was the most straightforward way to address it. So I want you to ask yourself, right? And again, the biggest indicator of who we include is not policy. It's our patterns. That's why organizations continue to hire the same people at the same level. They bring in all their friends that they feel the most affinity towards, the ones they'd like to hang out with and have a beer with after work. Yes? And it's not even that they're trying to exclude anyone. Again, this is often, not always, but often unintentional. It's simply a pattern. We like effortless relationships. There's nothing wrong with that, except when it limits your leadership, right? Taking these little tests, it forces us to challenge our own comfort zones, right? If you wouldn't naturally invite them to lunch or to dinner or, a weekend away or some casual conversation when you don't have to talk about work at all, then it's worth leaning into it with curiosity. So ask yourself, right? Have I had a meaningful one-on-one conversation with this person in the last couple months? Like meaningful. Would they say they feel recognized, really, and even known by me? What would they say about that? Again, this is not to call you out. This is to call out our own very human, very natural biases that get in the way of how we lead. And then when we're already so busy doing what are in most cases the jobs of 2 or 3 people, of course we're not looking for something that we have to pour more effort into. Does that resonate? So here's what leaders get wrong. Of course, I'm oversimplifying, but you get what I mean. A lot of leaders think that inclusion really means trying harder. Yes? Doing more, having more programs. But trying harder isn't necessarily scalable. Right? It's exhausting. Your plate, I'm going to bet, even though you're here, maybe listening to this live, or you might be watching it later as a recording because you couldn't make it to the live conversation, even though you tried to prioritize it on your calendar. It's unsustainable. We cannot just keep trying harder, right? Instead, the goal is to build a new way of how we lead, how we run our teams, how we operate, right? Creating systems that make inclusion less filled with effort and angst, more automatic. They make it sustainable. They make it effective because it's part of how we make decisions every day, right? It's not what we have left over. In fact, I remember when I was way overworking years ago before I started my own company. And it's funny because for those of you who are entrepreneurs, you overwork, but it's a little bit different. When I was way overworking in a corporate space, I would come home, and one of the things that had me recognize it was time to make a change was that my family was getting my leftovers. So what I said was the most important thing to me was actually the thing that fell to the very bottom, right? And that probably sounds familiar for you too. Again, this doesn't make me a bad person. It just makes me human. And that's the case for all of us. So think about it. If your week is literally spent, I don't know, chasing after your team, chasing deliverables, repeating meetings that didn't give you the result you wanted, firefighting, of course you don't have time to lead inclusively. Can you see that? You don't have time to lead effectively. I'm actually going to bet that you're not really leading. You're probably spending more of your time reacting. So you're probably spending more time down here micromanaging because your team's not aligned. The systems you need in place to operate. And when I say systems, I mean the actual protocols, the ways of working, the expectations, the level of clarity that you need, and everybody on board with that you need to operate is not there, or it's lacking, or it needs a refresh, or whatever the case is. Yes? Because your leadership effort is not a problem. What's the problem is your leadership system. The fact that you're spending so much time spinning your wheels and trying to do your day-to-day that literally inclusion, diversity, creating the kind of culture and environment and way of being that you want falls off the plate. There's no room for it. Yes? So I want to talk about the hidden cost of leading without systems. Now, this is a really short conversation. We're only scheduled to go for another 13 minutes or so. I'm glad to stay on for additional Q&A and back and forth, but I just want to assure you, we only have another few minutes because I really, more than anything, wanted to impress upon you these impacts that we're talking about now. When you're leading without systems, leading somewhat inefficiently or ineffectively. So I'm going to run through these really quickly. So let's start with constant firefighting. And what I mean by that is that you're always reacting. You're defaulting to the people, you're going to the people you always go to for the same things, right? The same team members that you always count on or rely on. Your problem solving is typically kind of the same as it looked yesterday, and you're focused primarily on urgent tasks. And that's what firefighting looks like. What we don't get when we're in that type of space is an opportunity to coach and develop a broader, more diverse group of our team members instead of relying on the same familiar faces, the people who, like I said, are effortless. So if we're saying that diversity and inclusion are important to us, it's okay to put out effort. What we need to do is be smart about the way that we are managing ourselves, our careers, our teams, so that we have space for that effort to create, because we know that effort's worth it. We want to invest in creating that kind of space that we envision as possible. But the impact you end up having when you don't have those systems is you really do end up inadvertently creating less visibility for underrepresented employees, fewer chances to diversify the leadership pipelines. Again, because you're trying to shortcut everything, you're trying to do the easiest, but the most important things, the most valuable things are not necessarily the easiest. And we know this. That's okay. So that's why we need to make sure that we are managing in a way that allows space for that. So on to the next one, repeating yourself and following up, having duplicate wasted meetings. If you're constantly chasing down updates, and give me a quick note in the chat, just type familiar. If any of this sounds familiar as I'm going through the process, go ahead and type familiar. But if you're constantly chasing down updates, if you are re-explaining decisions that you could have sworn were settled on, rehashing the same issues, then of course you have less time to invest in your team's development. What you're missing is the opportunity to have really intentional one-on-ones, to provide that really deliberate mentorship, to develop a culture of team coaching, right? Where everyone helps everyone grow. Yes? So the impact is clear, right? High potential employees will get overlooked because they don't get the same type of informal mentorship that others might. Again, the ones who are more effortless to you. And of course, this continues to limit diversity in leadership succession. And we can take responsibility for that as individual leaders. Feeling like a referee instead of, again, let me know if it sounds familiar, feeling like a referee instead of a leader. Feeling like you're, standing between team members who are going at it all the time, right? You're spending more time mediating their conflict than developing them. It's a sign of deeper misalignment. And this misalignment is what allows exclusion to thrive. Not just does it allow exclusion to thrive, but even when you get to that space of having the type of team environment and level of diversity that you want, then what happens? You have the diversity revolving door. And this happens specifically because of what we're talking about here. The hidden cost of leading without systems, burning the candle at both ends, hoping that some function will pick up the slack for you. And then the moment that that function disappears or someone tries to take it away because it actually seems like it's working, right, and the status quo is being threatened, then out goes your priority, yes? So what you're missing is a structured way to set clear expectations, to resolve conflict, to create a culture where people feel safe speaking up even when they disagree. Because otherwise what you really do have are employees who feel unheard and they disengage and they don't trust each other, they don't trust you, and the story goes on. So there are a couple more of these. I'm going to try to go through them quickly. And this is just being exhausted and inclusion falls to the bottom. And I've hit on this one a lot. When you're overwhelmed, you naturally spend time with people you already know and feel comfortable with without realizing who's missing. That's the best way I can put that. You just don't realize who's missing because it's easier without them. That's what it feels like, yes? Especially when you don't have the systems set up to work to allow you to develop that leadership muscle in yourself and among your team members. You also have, and there's some personal costs to you as well, and I want to make sure I pinpoint these because they go hand in hand. And these are missed opportunities for promotion and career growth. Right? Your visibility and your influence shrink because, again, you are so busy micromanaging, putting out fires, working down here at this level, trying to correct things that aren't going as expected instead of up here at this level, that you're not seen as a strategic leader. You're seen as somebody who's, a good worker bee. You with me? Again, drop familiar in the chat if this sounds familiar. The next one is loss of peace of mind. And this probably goes without saying, but that level of overwhelm and feeling never in control, it's going to impact you not only in terms of your career, but it's likely eventually going to impact leaders physically, emotionally, etc. So if your blood pressure isn't already rising because you have that constant overwhelm and churn, you're doing something right. But what you want to do is avoid that overwhelm and churn, right? What you're missing there is the ability to lead proactively. And again, shape what you want your team and that culture to look like. Okay. So this is what I want to impress upon you. The leadership shift that you need to make is to make leadership sustainable so that inclusion can be automatic. You want high-performing, engaged, inclusive teams that don't require you to add an extra couple of hours to your day just to manage them. right? I've set up my leaders that I work with to be able to manage their teams in an hour a week once they have the right systems and ways of working and expectations and clarity in place. And I know it might sound impossible now, but it's not. It's very possible. And in fact, I hope you recognize it's more possible than the likelihood of you being able to sustain that insane level of work and then trying to pack on top of it something that your organization has deprioritized, especially when it's something that really is in your hands to reprioritize. This is why leadership systems aren't just about efficiency, right? They're about building the kind of team that you want to be on, that you want to lead, that where every voice is valued, where you can take a little extra time making sure you've gone to new venues, reached out to new networks to fill the room with different types of, highly capable, motivated employees who don't all look like the status quo, right? In this space, engagement is intentional. Inclusion doesn't end up being an afterthought or relying on some function. It's a leadership habit. It's your leadership habit. Because if you're constantly in firefighting mode, it's not just a leadership effort problem. It's literally a team management problem. And when leaders are stuck reacting, inclusion is one of the first things to slip. And it's not because they don't care, but because they don't have the bandwidth to give it the care it needs. They don't have the bandwidth to be intentional. And that's one of the reasons I built my team leadership operating system, which I'm not going to get into here, but I do want to mention that to you because I want to encourage you to schedule a consultation, right? Real inclusion, it's not a one-time initiative, right? It's not some government mandate or a function or even a measure. It's built into how we run our teams every single day. And the team leadership operating system takes inclusion into account and it makes it part of who you are and how you lead. It helps you stop spinning your wheels so that you can start leading a high-performing, engaged, inclusive team, right? Which without feeling like you're giving up your nights and weekends, because that should never have been part of the deal. So I want you to think about it. Don't overcomplicate it. Just think about what's one conversation or check-in or moment of recognition that can change the way you're engaging this week, right? Drop in the comments, what's one small shift that you can make this week to expand who you engage with. And again, if you're watching this live or you're coming back and watching the recording, please go ahead and drop it in the comments. What's one small shift you can make to expand who you engage with? And how can you implement some level of system or clarity in the way your team operates so you're spending less time reacting and more time being a strategic leader? Right? If you want more strategies and actually want to work on building a high-performing, engaged team, let's absolutely connect. And actually, I do have a question. I don't know if any of you here are currently in transition, considering making a change, exploring new avenues or places to go. Because I wasn't going to announce this yet, but I do want to share it. So I set up a link for you here, but I want to encourage you. I know a lot of people right now are feeling at risk or like they need more control over their career. Yeah. Especially if you're in DEI or you prioritize DEI personally, or you're in the federal government or you're in industries facing these cuts. I want to, share this opportunity with you. I haven't even sent it out to my email list, but I'm getting it. I'm getting there. You guys are actually going to get it first because I went ahead and added the link here. But it's called the Rapid Career Rebuild. It's a 6-session program designed really to help experienced professionals. This isn't for you if you're just out of school. It's not like that. But it's to reposition yourself. It's to rebuild momentum. It's to land high-value roles fast. It's only 3 weeks. We meet 6 structured sessions over 3 weeks. It's a group program plus an additional session each week just for live on-the-spot coaching. So it's incredibly inexpensive. I wanted to make it really affordable. So I made it only $299. I'll give you a link again so you can read all about it because I haven't put it on my website. But if you've been either laid off or you're feeling stuck or you're feeling frustrated or you need to make a strategic move, but you aren't sure how to position yourself, this will help you get clear. It'll help you get visible and start taking action so that you're positioning yourself for more opportunities and to get hired into the type of role and at the level of pay, right, that the market dictates, that you dictate. And it's only $2.99 again, because I know the right strategy at the right time can make all the difference. So I'm going to go ahead and share it now, even though my email list hasn't heard about it. I'm going to drop the link in here. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'll make sure the link is dropped on the page for this event so that if you're watching on a replay, you can go ahead and access it there as well. Let me see if I can find this here. Otherwise, please feel free to schedule a consultation with me. You can see, let's see, you see my mouse pointer. I guess you can't see my mouse, but you can see on the main screen, I have my bridgewellpro.com/consult, and you can schedule a conversation with me there. Disregard the pricing that's listed there as you're filling out the questionnaire to schedule your session, because I have some dramatically discounted at a fraction of the cost programs available. They're limited, but they are available now. If they're no longer available, I will update it so that you know. But go ahead and schedule a consultation. It's free. I want to hear what you're contending with and what you're trying to make happen. And again, if you need support making a shift or just getting yourself back to yourself, then definitely join the Rapid Career Rebuild. Okay, that is the most access you'll ever have to me in a group environment at this low a rate. And again, my programs cost substantially more than this, but I think this is going to be a fantastic one. You can read all about it at the Google Sheet I prepared with the details, and it'll take you through exactly what we're going to do week by week by week. Okay, so we are done with the official portion of the session, but if you're still here with me, I would love to hear, what are your key takeaways? What are you taking with you from this conversation? How are you starting to see what you can do as it relates to DEI differently? And whether you're watching this live or you are watching the recording, I would love to come back and see your comments. So please do share. Otherwise, you can also feel free to drop any questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to get back to you via LinkedIn mail. So I don't see any questions coming in right this second. I have my eyes right over here on the right, looking at the chat. So I'm going to wrap up and let you get back to your days. But again, I hope this has been helpful. I hope you are seeing that you have a lot more control over whether you have and develop a diverse team, help elevate employees so that the landscape in your environment reflects the values and the diversity and the level of inclusion and equity that you want it to reflect. Please do not leave it to whether your organization has a function that they are funding. Let it become a function of how you operate and how you lead yourself and your teams. Okay, with that, thank you for being with me. Go out there and lead.